Isolation Protocol Day 36. It is Tuesday, time for some more reading. I have been working on editing Girl Unseen, going through it just for pacing and stuff like that at this point. And I've already made changes in what I've already read. So, yeah, here's another section that is the first draft. I think I left off in the middle of chapter 3 last time. I'm not sure. But this is a section that's going to need a lot of editing, but I'm going to read it anyway. Reese sat alone in the library, her homework long since finished. The librarian left, just for a few minutes, he had said, but that had been over an hour ago. She glanced at the clock. Nearly 5 o'clock. She wondered how long she'd be able to stay, and just as she was hoping that he had completely forgotten her, he returned. "Time to close up, Miss Reese." "Thank you, Mr. Gardner." "Were you doing homework all this time?" Reese shrugged, which he seemed to take for a yes. "Mr. Fields does a homework club, well, he did it last year, after school, for students who didn't have computers at home or something like that. You should check it out. I'm sure he'll do the same this year. But, you're perfectly welcome to do your homework in here, too." "Maybe I will," Reese automatically gave an uncommitted answer. She picked up her now battered grocery bag that had held her school supplies and headed out. If she took her time walking, Mr. McIntyre would be passed out by the time she got back to her current foster home. Mrs. McIntyre was probably already at whichever bingo game she went to on Mondays. A movement caught her attention, and a bright yellow car silently left the teacher's parking lot. Reese surprised herself by not ducking behind a tree, as was her usual response. It was Mr. Fields. If she had known, she probably would have ducked, she thought. But as it was, he was looking at oncoming vehicles and never looked her way. There was a strange tingling sensation on her back. It started in the center and spread until she wriggled in the old sweatshirt. The electric car turned onto the street and headed in the direction she was going to walk. She waited until it was several blocks away before she started walking. Her reaction startled her until she thought about it. She must be developing a crush on the cute young teacher with the magical green eyes. She'd seen it in every school she could remember. There was always a teacher or two that somebody crushed on, and from the reaction at lunch, probably every girl in the school had fallen under the math teacher's spell. 3 miles and an hour later, Reach was approaching the McIntyre house when the sisters, who were also placed with him, called from the porch. "It's safe, Princess. He's done for the day." Reese was startled that she was already back at the McIntyre's house. "Hello, Marky. Hello, Patty." She could never tell the twins apart. Reese pushed past the only partially clothed girls and into the house. Mr. McIntyre was passed out on the filthy sofa, clothed only in stained boxers and a cloud of smoke. Reese raided the kitchen, finding pretzels, cola, and peanut butter. She took her stash into the tiny room at the end of the hall and locked the door behind her. For good measure, she propped a battered wooden chair under the knob. She'd seen the trick in an old movie. Her room reeked of pot. What room in the house didn't? She opened the window, and leaning out, she stretched her hand to touch the last rays of the sun before it disappeared completely behind the house next door. She imagined the backyard as it could be, instead of the rock-hard dead square that it was. The tree in the corner managed to survive, even managed to grow a few undersized, shriveled-looking lemons. It was right up against the fence. It probably sent its roots into the neighbor's yard to steal a few life-giving drops of water. Gradually, in her mind's eye, the tree filled out and flourished. Flowers sprang up, not the rigid beds and carefully placed shrubs of a garden, but wildflowers of all shapes and sizes swaying in the breeze. Butterflies, dragonflies, and other wildlife appeared until there was such a flurry of activity, Reese laughed. Without realizing she had done so, she had taken her notebook out of its hiding place and was sketching the scene. Even the butterflies in her imagination seemed to pause and pose for her. When it was too dark to see what she was drawing, she carefully replaced her precious notebook and pencils into the small hole in the mattress. She added the paperwork that the school registrar had copied for her and given back. For the first time, she possessed the court order that would have to pass for a birth certificate, her social security card, and a dozen pages of personal information. 7 different schools, 19 different families, since she was found in that cabbage patch. The social worker was new. In her monthly phone call, she had managed to convince the woman that she needed all that information in order to get registered in school. Reese turned on the television but muted it. She really only wanted the light. The bare light bulb in the center of the ceiling had never worked. Dipping the pretzels into the peanut butter jar, she nibbled her way through some sitcom. She worried that the cola would keep her awake, but she was asleep before Mrs. McIntyre returned from bingo. Mornings were simpler. No one was awake that early. Mr. McIntyre was still snoring away on the sofa. Mrs. McIntyre had brought home groceries. She must have won something at bingo. Reese looked through the refrigerator but could only find meat. Steaks, ground beef, ribs, chicken. She found some sugary cereal in the cupboard, but no milk. Also dozens of bags of various chips and several bags of cookies. Reese remembered what the cafeteria lady had told her. The free lunch card was also good for breakfasts. Slipping her school supplies into a fresh plastic shopping bag, Reese left for school early. If she hurried, she could get something to eat before PE. Ugh. First period PE. Could life get any worse? She hoped it wouldn't be something like soccer or football. She was too small and always ended up getting hurt. Maybe it would be dance, she thought with a smiling sigh. But then she shook her head and pulled her hoodie up. No sense getting her hopes up. She let her mind wander. After dodging Mr. McIntyre for the past 3.5 weeks, it was a welcome release to relax. It didn't last long. Her mind quickly found its way to Mr. Fields and his incredibly green eyes. His incredibly invasive, hypnotic green eyes. She tried to think of something else, anything else, but the only thing that came to mind was Marky and her sister Patty. She briefly wondered how the twins managed to not go to school, but decided it was probably for the best. They kept Mr. McIntyre busy, and if the school found out that they were into drugs and more, they would assume Reese was too. Reese looked around. She still had about a mile to go to get to school. Ignoring the rumbling in her empty stomach, she looked at the carefully manicured gardens and lawns of this neighborhood. Even the luscious yards seemed sterile and lifeless. For some reason, the few yards that were unkempt, unmown, and wildly overgrown drew her in. She decided to bring her special notebook someday to sketch a few of the plants that she hadn't seen before. The closer she got to the school, the more she started closing off her surroundings. By the time she reached the cafeteria and picked up some breakfast, she was back to her nearly invisible self. And that's it for 2 Minute Tuesday. Again, it's quite a few minutes longer than 2, but yeah, this is that is from Girl Unseen, and that's pretty much it. I had just been editing all day, so I will be calling my son later tonight, and I'll give you an update on how he's doing tomorrow at the next isolation protocol.